On the morning of 14 August 2005, a Boeing 737 climbed away from the island of Cyprus into a sky so clear it looked almost painted. 121 people were on board, families returning from holiday, business travelers, children, a young couple who had only just begun their life together. The flight was supposed to be ordinary, Larnaca to Athens, then on to Prague. Nothing in the departure suggested that this aircraft was already carrying a death sentence. Within minutes, the plane stopped answering every radio call. Controllers called the crew by name. They tried the emergency frequency. They tried again. There was only silence. For more than 2 hours, the jet continued flying, perfectly steady, high above the Aegean, while the people inside it slowly vanished from the world of the living. When Greek fighter jets finally pulled alongside, the pilots looked through the windows and saw something that still sits in official reports, like a nightmare that refuses to fade. Oxygen masks hung from the ceiling like strange white flowers. Passengers sat upright or leaned against one another, none of them moving. In the cockpit, the first officer was slumped forward over the controls, completely still. The captain's seat was empty. This was no longer a flight. It had become a ghost. The story of how it happened begins the night before. The same aircraft had returned from London with a small complaint. A door seal was making unusual noises and forming ice in flight. A ground engineer was ordered to test the pressurization system. To perform the test, he switched the critical pressurization mode selector from automatic to manual. When the test was finished, he never switched it back. The switch stayed in the wrong position through the night, through the morning checks, through the moment the doors closed and the aircraft pushed back from the gate. The next morning, the flight crew arrived. Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten was a 59-year-old German pilot with decades of experience. First Officer Pampos Charalambous was a 51-year-old Cypriot who had flown for the airline for years. Together, they carried tens of thousands of flying hours. They performed their checklists carefully. 3 separate times the position of that single switch should have been noticed. 3 times it was missed. At 9:07, the Boeing 737 lifted off from Larnaca. As it climbed, the cabin began to lose pressure. At just over 12,000 feet, a loud warning horn sounded in the cockpit. The sound is almost identical to another warning that only appears on the ground. The pilots believed they were hearing the wrong alarm. They continued climbing. Clear thinking requires oxygen. As the aircraft rose through 20,000 feet, then 25,000, the air inside the cabin grew thinner and colder. The crew's ability to reason began to fray. Conversations slowed. Simple decisions became strangely difficult. By the time the plane leveled at 34,000 feet, almost no one on board was fully conscious. The autopilot, programmed hours earlier, simply kept flying. Among the cabin crew that morning was a 25-year-old man named Andreas Prodromou. He had only joined the flight at the last moment. A colleague had called in sick. Andreas had hesitated, then agreed, because his girlfriend was already rostered on the same aircraft. He held a commercial pilot's license. He dreamed of becoming a captain. He was also a scuba diver, a man used to thinking carefully about oxygen. That small detail would keep him alive longer than anyone else. While the rest of the aircraft sank into hypoxia, Andreas managed to reach one of the portable oxygen bottles stored in the cabin. He stayed awake. He stayed thinking. And as the silent Boeing entered Greek airspace and began a long, perfect holding pattern over Athens, he was the only person left who still understood what was happening. Below the aircraft, air traffic controllers watched a radar blip that refused to speak. Above it, 2 F-16 fighters closed in for a closer look. One of the fighter pilots slid his aircraft until it was almost level with the cockpit windows. What he saw would be written into official transcripts for years. The first officer was still in his seat, head slumped against the controls. The captain's seat was empty. Through the cabin windows, the pilots could see the oxygen masks and the motionless passengers. There was no smoke, no fire, no visible damage. The aircraft was intact and flying perfectly, while everyone inside appeared to be dead. For long minutes, the fighters stayed with the silent jet as it continued its slow circles over the sea. Then, at 11:49, something changed. A figure appeared in the cockpit. Andreas Prodromou stepped through the door. sat down in the empty captain's seat, and placed his hands on the controls. He looked across at the unconscious first officer. He tried to wake him. He tried to understand instruments he had never been trained to fly. Outside the window, he could see the F-16s. For a brief moment, he raised one hand and waved. Then the left engine began to die. Fuel was almost gone. The engine flamed out with a sudden loss of power. The Boeing started to descend. Andreas gripped the controls and tried to keep the wings level. He called Mayday into the radio, but the frequency was still set to Cyprus. No one on the ground heard him. The right engine was the only thing still keeping the plane in the air, and it too was running out of time. The right engine failed less than 10 minutes later. With both engines dead, the Boeing 737 became a heavy glider. Andreas was still in the captain's seat, still trying to fly an aircraft he had never been trained on, still fighting for altitude that no longer existed. The fighter pilots watched as the nose dropped, and the jet began its final descent toward the hills north of Athens. At 12:04, the aircraft struck the rising ground near the village of Grammatico. It tore across the hillside, breaking apart as it went. There were no survivors. 121 people died that morning. Later examinations would show that most of them still had heartbeats at the moment of impact. They had not been killed by the crash itself. They had been unconscious for more than 2 hours, their brains starved of oxygen, trapped in a deep and irreversible coma, while the plane flew itself through a perfect blue sky. The investigation that followed was clear and merciless. A single switch left in the wrong position after overnight maintenance. 3 separate checklists that failed to catch it. A warning horn the pilots misidentified. A slow, invisible loss of consciousness that no one on board fully understood until it was too late. Andreas Prodromou had woken up alone in a silent aircraft and tried to save it. He had waved at the fighters. He had called for help that never came. In the final minutes, he had done everything a human being could do. It was not enough. Today, the crash site is quiet. The hillside has grown over, but the image remains. A modern airliner circling in a perfect blue sky, full of people who could no longer wake up, while one young man sat alone in the cockpit and refused to stop fighting until the ground rose up to meet him. One forgotten switch, 2 hours of silence, and a ghost flight that ended only when there was nothing left to burn.